I wish to welcome everyone to this meeting of the Government Operations and Health Facilities Subcommittee of the House Government Operations, Health and Government Operations Committee. Our principal focus, initial focus, and principal focus this afternoon will be the cybersecurity bills. We are joined by Delegate Pat Young, who served as the House Chair of the Joint Committee. These bills are the product of that committee, their interim work, with a good bit of refinement and input, I believe, from members of this committee as well as others. And Delegate Young is going to be very involved in our consideration of these bills this afternoon. So first bill is House Bill 1205. And I think I'd like to suggest that instead of you reading through the entire bill with all the changes, if you could stop at what you consider to be appropriate points in the bill so that we can see if there are any questions at that stage, and then we will ultimately go back to everything. But I think I'd like to have that kind of discussion, sort of see if there's questions step by step. Not every amendment, but let's try and proceed in that fashion.
Sure, and I defer. I mean, I can do that. I know that thank Lindsay Rowe for the work that she's done on fashioning these amendments. I have the reprints in front of me. I was looking for just the amendments themselves, but Lindsay, if you're okay with it, since I know that you drafted through them, if you wanted to go through the amendments and I can add nuance and answer questions related to them, I'm fine with that structure.
Absolutely. And what I did for hopefully the committee's ease is I circulated reprints of all of these bills because there are a lot of amendments, and I think most people tend to find it easier to look at the interlineated version when there's this many changes happening in a bill. So broadly, before we dive into the sort of page of this bill, the 1205 is with the amendments, pretty broad things.
Whoever has their sound on, please turn it off. Thank you.
The first is creating a statewide reporting framework and oversight commission. The bill's creating a local cybersecurity support fund. And then the bill is also making changes to procurement, making DoIT a primary procurement unit to handle procurement of information technology, telecommunications, and cybersecurity. All right, so diving into the bill, and you should have a reprint in front of you with a timestamp of yesterday, 3/16/22 at the top on the first page. The first thing that you'll see is language struck. It's removing authority for the Stadium Authority to issue bonds and finance IT and cybersecurity projects. Also continuing and struck language on page 4 is deleting language on an information technology and cybersecurity infrastructure fund that would have been funded through MSA bonds. Moving to page 5, the Secretary of DoIT is responsible for updating IT and cybersecurity related state government infrastructure. Then at the bottom of page 5 and moving on to page 6 is where we have the establishment of the Statewide Reporting Framework and Oversight Commission. This commission is established to ensure security of information and determine appropriate upgrades.
And who are, broadly speaking, who are the members of this commission?
So the membership starts on line 10, page 6. You will see a couple of changes to the membership through amendment. One in particular, the co-chairs that are struck there, the co-chairs of the Joint Committee, they're moved onto the top of page 7 as advisory members rather than voting members of this commission to address any concerns about separation of powers issues.
Okay. And this is both private sector and public sector members.
Members of the commission?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Fine.
Moving on to page 7, the commission is tasked with developing a strategic roadmap and making recommendations on investments. And there's a report further down that page to the General Assembly from the Commission. I know that at the last meeting 2 weeks ago, Aaron Chase raised a concern about any sensitive information in that report. So an amendment is added about 2/3 of the way down that page, that the report not contain information on security of an information system.
And those who want to be excluded are excluded.
So
In the bottom
yes,
of
you're
page
getting, you're
7.
getting onto the next page. So that's the end of the discussion on the commission.
Oh, sorry.
Yep. So the next
Okay,
page,
hold on.
or
Let me
the
just
bottom
see.
of this page.
1 second. Are there any questions about what we've discussed thus far? Okay, thank you. Sorry, Lindsay.
Sure. So what you're seeing at the bottom of that, page 7 and onto the next page is a requirement for development of a framework for investments in technology and assessments for each unit of state government every 3 years. So at the bottom of page 7, you'll see that those assessments do not apply to these units that are listed here. So those are the port, so for everyone's benefit, that's the Port Administration, University System of Maryland, St. Mary's College, Morgan State Stadium Authority, Baltimore City Community College, and the State Board of Elections. And the language on the assessments was moved from annually to every 3 years. That's to help reduce a little bit of the cost of those assessments. Moving on to page 8, there's requirements for the assessments. There's a requirement that the assessments be reported both to the commission, and we've added a report to committees of the General Assembly. And again, language that just for the report that goes to the General Assembly, that will also not contain information about the security of an information system, since that report would be made available to the public.
And this report to the General Assembly is every 3 years?
The results of the assessments are every 3 years. So the results of those assessments would then also be every 3 years. But the report would come more often if those assessments are staggered. It's, I suppose, up to do it how they want to do it, but presumably they'll stagger the assessments.
And the thought,
work out the work.
and the thought there being one for saving costs, but as well, 3 years in between a security assessment is considered to be a long period of time, but continuously reporting, it may request for reports would not have the same fiscal note or same fiscal impact on an agency when requested or reporting, sending a report to the General Assembly.
Okay, moving to page 9, the top of that page, the language that struck there was related to the MSA bonds. And then under that struck language, this local cybersecurity support fund is language that was pulled from House Bill 1202. So that's being moved into this bill. The purpose of the fund is to assist local governments in their cybersecurity preparedness. And continuing on to the unnumbered page that follows page 9, eligibility for local governments to receive assistance from the fund. To be eligible to receive assistance from the fund, they must undergo cybersecurity preparedness assessments, which are provided at cost to the local government. So no, that cost does not exceed what it costs to do it, to provide the assessment.
Does the bill speak to a projected ratio of funding as to how much would be local and how much would be state?
This particular fund is for local support.
But is there a local match of any required of any sort? Or would this just be, I'm not taking a policy position, just inquiring?
Yeah, in terms of how much and for what the funds could be used for, we left it broad for the department to identify for themselves.
Fine.
Finally, the language at the bottom of that page is just standard language that the interest goes into the fund rather than into the general fund.
I see Mr. Duncan of our DLS staff has a point to make.
Yes, just to answer your question about, so the cybersecurity assessments generally range from $25,000 to $100,000 per IT system that's being assessed. I think that's what the point you were getting at when you asked about local matching. So the idea behind that is they kind of pay for the assessment up front to do it, and then they have access to the local funding and the local cybersecurity support fund.
No, I appreciate the answer, but I actually was asking about what is the local share of the investment after the assessment?
Oh, okay. Oh, I apologize.
That's all right. No,
And if
no problem.
If I could, Mr. Chairman,
Sure.
Richard Duncan not only staffs the joint committee, but he also staffed the interim work group. So we made sure to bring him in here as he has an expertise in what we've been fashioning and putting together the last few months.
And I believe he also writes the fiscal minutes,
He sure does.
which is of some value. Yes. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, Lindsay, sorry.
All right, so then on moving to page 10, we're getting to another subject that is getting to
I
procurement.
see no raised hands, so I assume we're ready to move on. Thank you, Lindsay. Go ahead.
So at the top of page 10, do it is being added to the definition of primary procurement units. Some folks might remember this change from about 5 or 6 years ago. Do it used to be a primary procurement unit. Then do its procurement activities were placed under DGS 5 or 6 years ago. And so this bill is undoing that change so that do it will not be overseen by DGS now in their procurement activities.
Okay.
Further down page 10, procurements by Do It for the purpose of modernizing cybersecurity infrastructure below $1 million will not be subject to BPW oversight. But at the very bottom of that page, and then moving on to the next page, Do It is required to submit an annual report to BPW on those procurements.
Okay.
And this is
That's the level of review. Okay.
Following down the unnumbered page that occurs after page 10, this is just a conforming change that IT and telecom equipment procurement is taken out of the authority of DGS, consistent with that this is now with Do It. On the top of page 11 is the new language for Do It, saying that they may engage in or control IT, telecom, and cybersecurity procurement without oversight from any other primary procurement unit. Further down page 11, requirements governing change orders for construction are expanded to IT and cybersecurity contracts. And the struck language at the bottom of that page removes language from the bill that would have allowed an independent contractor performing an assessment to issue a change order on an original assessment contract for the upgrades that they are recommending.
Okay. Are there,
Yeah,
Chairman Pendergrass?
thank you. Was I unmuted that whole time? I'm sorry if I was. Let me try and do this. Sorry, there are things
Okay.
going on. My question is, we definitely have Do It in charge of purchasing, which I think is excellent. The question is, do we have procurement shall help as requested in this bill? And if we don't, do we need it? That's a policy question that I'm not answering, but I want you to think about whether, because of minority contracting and the complications of bid processing and all that stuff, do they need to be, does procurement need to be required to be in there helping them? And I'll leave it at that. I'll go back to invisible and muted.
Delegate Young, do you have any thoughts on that?
So, and one, knowing that procurement is absolutely something HGO is experts on, my thought is that we've been cognizant of the spending amount and funding, but in terms of processes related to what they should be doing anyway, what every other agency should be doing, I think my assumption is that they would be following the standards and practices that any other agency would relate it to minority contracting and under the same scrutiny. So that was my understanding, but so we didn't include it specifically in the bill. We were focused more on the amounts.
If I could ask Lindsay as a follow-up, as a primary, Do It would be considered a primary contractor, correct?
A primary procurement unit.
Okay, thank you. What review under that definition is there of the concerns that the chair has raised,
As
if
far
any?
as whether or not they need assistance in their procurement activities, I mean, I really can't speak to that. I don't know if anyone from DeWitt is in this meeting. I did note that they were a primary procurement unit not terribly long ago, and we're doing these activities at that point. And then as far as consultation on procurement questions is concerned, DGS is here. I don't know if they can speak to whether or not the primary procurement units ever consult with them as far as their procurement activities. The other primary procurement units are Department of Transportation, USM, the Port Commission, Morgan State, and St. Mary's. So they might be consulting at times. I'm not sure.
If I could add to your question, both is that what consultation is there and what review is there of their procurements with regard to minority and small business and so on. So do we have a volunteer to answer that?
Yes, sir. Good afternoon,
Mike?
Delegate Rosenberg. Thank you. DGS is a little bit concerned about moving the procurement activity out of the department back to Department of Information Technology. Lindsay was correct. House Bill 1021 of 2017 centralized the procurement activity under DGS, where formerly it was under Department of Information Technology and Budget and Management. That was a result of the Procurement Commission. We, Office of State Procurement, have been live now for about 2.5 years. October 1 of 19 is when the bill took effect. We worked with the Department of Information Technology for a significant amount of time trying to align processes and create efficiencies. And I think we've accomplished that. And we're kind of well on our way to realizing some of the vision of the Procurement Commission. One of your specific questions was about the back and forth between the departments. Typically, the Department of Information Technology, they're the experts on the systems, the types of skill sets that are needed, the types of equipment that are needed. So they, and as they should, define what the requirements are to solve the problems. And then those requirements move over to us at Office of State Procurement, and we handle the procurement activity. I would add that state procurement is very specialized, and so is information technology. I'm not sure why they would want to do procurement. We certainly don't want to do information technology, and I'm sure you don't want us doing that as well.
Can I ask Delegate Young then? Thank you. Can I ask Delegate Young why what's before us proposes?
So this recommendation this was one of the recommendations from the interim committee, and looking at what other states have done and looking at what is necessary or needed in terms of procurement for specific cybersecurity needs, and just addressing the needs of an entire state, entire system, that having procurement authority under DeWitt or a state's IT agency was the standard that folks were moving to when we were moving towards a centralized system. So that the fact that DeWitt didn't have that authority or ability to do so slowed the process of modernizing and upgrading systems where needed. As Mr. Hapley had mentioned, they're the experts in terms of identifying what systems are needed and what needs to secure someone's network or even securing a department's data. The speed bump in actually putting that into practice was the procurement piece that was shown in other states. So the push and the set recommendation for Maryland, at least, was to give them back their procurement authority, primary procurement authority, so that speed bump wouldn't be there. However, there was still the expectation and understanding that same practices that are expected of any agency that has the primary procurement authority to need to identify minority-owned businesses and standards we've already set would still be in place. But that was the reason behind the recommendation.
Delegate Pendergrass?
I will just say that for me, it's got to be under Do It. From the people I consulted in the tech industry, universally, the answer was you can't go through a procurement unit to do the work. The question was, did we want to mandate that they be there to help? And it sounds like procurement may wish to be out of it, or they may wish to help, but maybe we need to be silent, and maybe my question was ill-timed. We certainly are not moving. I'm not going to be comfortable not taking the recommendations of all of the experts on this. It needs to stay with Do It. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And I would say too, I don't believe that it prohibits them from consulting with any state agency that has an expertise in that field either.
Delegate Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Delegate Young, for bringing this to us today. And my question's along the same lines of procurement, which I get it. I'm hearing that we definitely need Do It to do it. But my question is, they have a kind of a free reins up to $1 million per purchase. So is there any ceiling value or any certain value limit that we then have our government agency to kind of take a look at everything? I understand we don't want to slow them up, but we also want checks and balances in place, I would think. So if you give us your thoughts on that.
Sure. And that's one why we limited it to specific purchases. It's not across the board. They still fall under the same restrictions for normal purchases. But when it comes to cybersecurity infrastructure upgrades, the $1 million cap was giving them leeway so that they wouldn't be hitting that same threshold every single time that there was a need to purchase something up to $1 million. So it's specific purchases, and we felt that the limitations were identifying what those purchases up to $1 million were, while they still fall under the same restrictions as another agency. Does that make sense, Delegate?
Yeah, it does. Okay, thank you.
You're
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I am going to recognize people from the bureaucracy or the public, but I am going to short rein because we need to move forward. So 30 seconds for each of you. Dr. Tomaszewski. Shusky, sorry.
Sorry, that's Maryland. So I appreciate the doctor, but I'm just a Mrs. But I work at the Department of General Services. So I wanted to go back to answer your question and the delegates about the oversight and the significance and importance of having the Department of General Services as the primary procurement unit. DGS has the ability to designate to any agency with expertise the ability to assist in conducting their procurements. And we do that on a daily basis with the Department of Information Technology. The oversight on processes for procurement, minority business, the diversity socioeconomic processes, and everything that we are the experts on as far as procurement, we're there to add value to that process for those agencies.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Eismeyer.
Thank you, Delegate Rosenberg, and thank you, Delegate Young, for Michael Eismeyer with the University System of Maryland. We thank you for accepting most of the amendments that we had proposed. The one amendment has to do with page 11, line 4, where it discusses, says of any other primary procurement unit. And we had proposed an amendment saying replace primary procurement unit with unit of the executive branch, simply because, today we do not, the university system and all of its institutions do not work through as institutions do in the executive branch. We do not work through general services, or prior to that, DOIT, when they were a primary procurement unit. So we would just ask that that amendment also be put in there, or somehow otherwise excluding the University System of Maryland from that requirement. Thank you.
And I'd like to just clarify that real quick.
Certainly.
It's USM's already covered under other provisions of law, and this language is consistent with the language for other primary procurement units. It says that they can engage in their activities without consulting the other primary procurement units.
Okay, Mike Hafley, 30 seconds.
Thank you, sir. I just wanted to say the bill as drafted does not allow any shortcuts for information technology to do procurement. They would follow the same process that General Services does. I'm not sure how they would do it faster. The other thing I just want to again say is that's the Department of General Services core competency. Thank you.
Okay. From the members, are there further discussion from the members on House Bill 1205? Okay, is there a motion to adopt the amendments that are interlineated with the bill?
With the amendments.
Second.
Any discussion on those amendments?
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I just got a real quick question. Lindsay, you just responded to USM about their concerns, and you noted that their concerns are in another provision. Would that be the same for the Port of Baltimore as well? And maybe Delegate Young would probably know exactly what I'm talking about. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Is it talking about the same concern?
So thanks for the question, Delegate. Talking with the port yesterday, talking with MDOT and the other multiple agencies that had concerns from the original draft, there was specifically in one of the other bills was section 4 and 5 that talked about IT departments, and those sections were taken out, which we'll hopefully get to soon. And unless Lindsay wants to jump in, the amendments we got from USM, we did take almost all of them. The ones we left out were because due to Lindsay's expertise and looking through and realizing that the concern, well noted, we believe is covered through the language and then separated them out somewhere else in the bill while we didn't take exactly the same language they had asked for.
Okay, I knew it was all starting to sound the same, and I just wanted clarity. So thank you.
Thank you.
Delegate Kaiser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is not about the amendments themselves, and which I'm fine with. So maybe I should wait till we vote on the amendments, or did we?
Well, you mean till after we vote on the amendments?
Yeah, I have a question about the bill.
Thank you. Why don't we vote on the amendments? All those in favor of the amendments say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, the ayes have it. Delegate Kaiser is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and obviously thank you, Delegate Young and everyone else on this bill. So my question, when we have that reporting language and it had that exclusion for about security issues, and I'm not wording it exactly correctly, that seems perfectly appropriate. But there's also a role that the General Assembly can play in regards to such important information like that is through the Legislative Policy Committee. And the Legislative Policy Committee has a provision for closed meetings on certain issues of high need of confidentiality or security. Is there a way to include that so the General Assembly can be updated on those issues? So I'm sorry I didn't bring this up before when we chatted about this bill a couple of weeks ago, Delegate Young.
Good.
So there's provision in the Public Information Act now that any public reports should not be including information about the security of an information system. So this language was actually sort of pulled from the Public Information Act just to make it abundantly clear that this report would not include that. There's also provisions under the Open Meetings Act that any public body can close a meeting. I think that's what you're referring to with LPC potentially.
Yeah, because LPC has like 13 exceptions for the things they can close a meeting for. And I think
all public
cyber is one of
bodies
them.
do, and cybersecurity is one of those
Oh,
things.
so we wouldn't have to say it now.
Right. So you might remember this committee was actually going to be receiving a briefing on cybersecurity issues with the MDH hack. And there was the potential that if any of the responses to questions were sensitive in nature, the HGO committee announced that there was the potential to close that meeting if there was a need to discuss specific cybersecurity concerns. We didn't end up doing that, but any public body can do so. So if you in the future received a briefing on this issue, you could close a meeting to discuss that, or a report, as I mentioned, would already have this information taken out of it.
Thank you.
Is there a motion on the bill as amended?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Okay, all those in favor of the bill House Bill 1205 as amended, please raise your hand. I think we ought to do this one on raised hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Everyone present? Yes. None opposed. Motion carries. Okay, House Bill 1346. And let's go through that one, obviously, the same way.
Okay, again, I'm going to say broadly what this bill does, and then we'll start
Sure.
by page.
Sure.
So broadly, what this bill is doing, and some of these provisions I'll note are also covered in House Bill 1202. So I'll do my best to note where those provisions are covered. Both of these bills are also covering provisions that are covered in the administration bill, House Bill 419, which is also on the agenda today, so that we can work to make sure that everything that needs to be covered related to those things is covered where it needs to be. This bill.
Well, we're amending this bill so we can add sponsors if we wish.
Yes.
Go ahead.
This bill codifies the Office of Security Management, the head of which is the State Chief Information Security Officer. That both were created by executive order, which is why I say codifying it. It also codifies the Cybersecurity Coordinating Council and expands the responsibilities of that council from the original executive order. Establishes the Cybersecurity Coordination and Operations Unit in DO-IT. Centralizes IT policy under DO-IT, but allows units to continue their own IT procurement. Establishes state and local cybersecurity preparedness assessments and reports and requirements to report cybersecurity incidents. So now we're going to dive into the bill. The first few pages, what you're going to see is renumbering of the title for DO-IT from 3A to 3.5. That's just drafting convention for numbering of titles. So the first few pages are correcting cross-references due to that renumbering. Then starting on page 6, you'll see struck language. This was the Cybersecurity Coordination and Operations Office was going to be put under Mdem and is going to be moved instead to DO-IT later in the bill. Starting on page 9, this is language codifying the Office of Security Management, as I mentioned, is the head of which is the CISO, is the abbreviated term for State Chief Information Security Officer.
When you say codify, are there any substantive changes in this bill to the executive order?
So there are going to be some changes from, well, there are going to be some differences from House Bill 419. This language is, however, the same as House Bill 1202, which is doing the same.
Which we've just adopted. Okay.
No, I'm sorry. We have not done 1202 yet.
Oh, we did 1205, sorry.
1205.
My mistake.
So the first difference that you'll see is the State Chief Information Security Officer, the language about being appointed by the governor with the advice and consent of the Senate, serving at the pleasure of the governor, supervised by the secretary, and served as the Chief Information Security Officer. That's a little bit different from House Bill 419. And I will say right now, since we're there, but we can get to it after we finish with the amendments from Delegate Young, I also circulated an amendment from Chair Pendergrass that would be inserted here for specific qualifications for the Chief Information Security Officer. So we can get to that after these amendments, but I'm just noting it here since we're at that point in this bill.
Thank you. Thank you.
This bill is also creating a director of local cybersecurity and a director of state cybersecurity. Those things are not in the administration bill. The responsibilities of the office start on page 10. The office is responsible for coordinating overall cybersecurity strategy for units of the state and supporting cybersecurity preparation of local governments in coordination with Mdem. And here we have, again, some differences from the administration bill and these responsibilities of the office, some more expanded activity. Also clarified here is that the office is not responsible for the information technology installation and maintenance operations that are normally conducted by a unit of state government, unit of local government, local school board, or local school system, or local health department. All right, there's a requirement beginning on page 12 that the office, in coordination with Mdem, assist locals on their cybersecurity preparedness. This is also identical to the language that's in House Bill 1202. And there's a reporting requirement for the office that's also different from House Bill 419, the administration bill.
I see no hands. Okay, please continue.
All right. Next, we're getting to the Maryland Cybersecurity Coordinating Council. This is starting at the bottom of page 13 and on to page 14. The membership of this council is also different from that in the administration bill. At the
To what extent is there outside? To what extent is there private sector, or is that not appropriate for this entity?
Well, there is a line, lines 24 and 25 on page 14 that allow for any other stakeholder that the CISO deems appropriate.
Delegate Young, do you wish to speak to that, or?
I was saying, so we didn't, it leaves it open, but also that the CISO would then make the determination on outside folks other than the folks that we've already named. So we wanted to leave it open for them, but also, like to your point, naming them here, we didn't feel appropriate, so we left it to the CISO to make the determination.
Okay.
The chair and meeting requirements of the council are the same as the administration bill. At the top of page 15, you'll see this language is struck that would have made the meetings of the council exempt from the Open Meetings Act. As I mentioned earlier, there's a provision in the Open Meetings Act for any public body to close a meeting to discuss cybersecurity issues. So this would essentially, the meetings of the council would be open, and if they needed to close them, they would close them under the Open Meetings Act.
They can already do so.
Right.
Mhm. Okay.
So the activities of the council, the first couple of items under subsection E here on page 15 are actually the same as the administration bill, but there are some differences further down the page, including that the council would prioritize risk and make recommendations for a budget, consult with outside experts. This was actually otherwise the same as House Bill 419, but this amendment changes this to a requirement to consult with outside experts as opposed to may consult. Further down, the requirement for the council to study partnerships is also a new addition from the administration's vision for this council. Also promoting cybersecurity education, advertising careers and jobs in government, and assisting applicants.
Go ahead.
On page 16 is the creation of the Cybersecurity Coordination Operations Unit. This is under DO-IT, and as I mentioned earlier in the bill, it was under Mdem. Their role is to assist political subdivisions in their cybersecurity preparedness.
Go ahead.
All right, getting on to the page that occurs after page 16. This is we're getting into the statutes governing information processing and security under DO-IT. This provision here exempts, so this is existing law and adding some additional provisions exempting IT procurements from requirements to be consistent with DO-IT's requirements, the statewide plan, master plan, et cetera. This is where USM is already covered, and the amendments add in the State Board of Elections, Office of the Attorney General, Comptroller, State Treasurer, the legislative and judicial branches.
For clarity, that it includes them in terms of on a list of folks that it doesn't apply to.
Right. Exempt them from the requirements. Yep.
Okay.
Getting on to, I think this is now the second unnumbered page after page 16. The IT policy for the executive branch is centralized under DeWitt. So this is the policy rather than the procurement. That's the amendment that you see in line 27.
Okay.
Moving to page 17, the IT master plan should allow agencies to maintain their own IT units. The Secretary of DeWitt should provide or coordinate cybersecurity procurements for locals that are paid for by the state. And also requires the Secretary to develop and maintain a statewide cybersecurity master plan.
Okay.
At the bottom of 17, the cybersecurity strategy should be in consultation with the new council that was created. On page 18, there's a requirement that the governor include an annual appropriation in an amount necessary to cover the costs of implementing the statewide cybersecurity master plan. And also a requirement that the governor report on IT budget information.
I see that report just goes to the money committees, doesn't go to the subject matter committees.
Yes.
It was more broad. I saw there was an addition elsewhere, either in this bill or another bill, to include the two subject matter committees. But this is a budget question.
Right.
Okay.
Effectively.
Delegate Young and then Delegate Saliga.
Sorry, I was answering your questions. I defer to
Okay.
Del.
Okay, fine. Delegate Saliga.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Lindsay, backing up to page 17, lines 10 and 11, the language that says allows a state agency to maintain its own IT, blah, blah, blah. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? I thought that was part of the reason we were doing this, to kind of streamline things.
Maybe Delegate Young would like to speak to this, but I believe the reason for this amendment was for certain agencies that have specific IT requirements that maybe, that they might have federal funding that's contingent on certain IT requirements and things like that. This allows them to maintain their own IT equipment and services that are in place rather than requiring DeWitt. But the DeWitt is still having the overarching policies, but not the actual procurement and the IT activities for these units.
And that's essentially right, Delegate, where as soon as the first bill came out, phone blown up with 10 different agencies with the concern that we were taking their IT departments and moving. One group thought we were taking them and putting them in a new building. This was to clarify that you have autonomy, you have your own people that you can hire and you can run your day-to-day. We're focusing on expanding DeWitt's role and their ability to then make sure that there's a plan that's implemented. And then if someone is not in compliance with the plan, to make sure that we're moving towards security while these agencies have their own IT folks hiring their own people and know their departments best.
All right, so you feel okay about that? I certainly understand that, part of this is to try to streamline things because everybody's doing such dissimilar things in many cases. So thank you for answering that.
Council.
Beginning on page 19, you're going to see a lot of language struck from the bill. Originally, the bill was centralizing IT procurement under DeWitt. And because that is not happening, a lot of these changes were conforming changes to reflect that. So they're struck from the bill consistent with that change. I will.
Saliga, your hand is still up. Do you intend it to be up?
No, I don't. Let me take that down. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, you can proceed, Lindsay.
I will note that at the top on upper half of page 20, what I just said did not necessarily get reflected in this amendment. I think that the language here on a unit of state government may not procure a lease or rental information technology unless consistent with the master plan, that should be restored to the original language with just the addition of the cybersecurity master plan, that new language. So you'd see the department and on behalf of a unit of state government being struck here. And then similarly in paragraph 2, the shall submit requests for language would be struck and the existing law should be returned. So I can make that update in the amendments, but again, to be consistent with that each unit of state government could be doing their own procurement here. You'd want to restore that language because it's not DoIT that will be doing it on behalf of them. Relatedly, in lines 10 and 11, those brackets should be struck to restore that unit or that language, excuse me, for units that are doing their own IT procurement. Otherwise, there's language here added just to make sure that everything is consistent with the new cybersecurity master plan as well.
You found that mistake on your 10th rereading of the statute, or I shouldn't ask?
I don't even know how many times.
Fine, you're doing fine.
So again, the struck language consistent with the changes that I discussed. Bottom of page 22 is just another cross-reference change. Some additional cross-reference changes on pages 24 and 25 and on 27. The next time we're getting to sort of more substantive things is bottom of page 29, top of page 30. This is the requirement to have DoIT assist local procurement cybersecurity that is done with state funding.
Which, to put it, I don't know if it's the chicken or the egg. They must, before their state funding, there has to be this review or input. Is that fair to say?
You're thinking of the grant fund.
Right. But how does that fit in here? Does it assist with the procurement?
So and Delegate Young can probably speak to this, there could be state funding that comes from another source other than the fund that we discussed in the prior bill.
Mm-hmm.
So
That's
it's
correct.
just, the assessment is just as a requirement to get funding from that fund. It would be a requirement on all state funding.
That's accurate.
Okay.
There's also language here that the DoIT may acquire telecom on behalf of a unit on request by that unit. At the bottom of page 30, there's a requirement for DoIT to develop basic security requirements that would be included in contracts when third parties are connecting to the state system or when there are small contracts for systems and devices that connect to the state system. So this is just requirements for the contract that would come from DoIT to be included for everyone else when they're executing those contracts. At the bottom of page 31, there's a provision that it was struck entirely here and it is included in part in House Bill 1202. So I'll just note that it's struck here and we'll discuss it when we get to 1202. On page 32, there's a requirement for units of state government to complete cybersecurity preparedness assessments and report. You'll note the language amended here that it's report on any cybersecurity preparedness assessment performed in the prior year. That's because in House Bill 1205, we said that these assessments would occur every 3 years. So for whatever the prior year is, if you had an assessment, then you would report.
Okay.
To page 33, the requirement to report cybersecurity incidents to the CISO. This is for units of state government.
Well, if I may, perhaps this is the right time. Well, first, Delegate Chisholm has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to make sure I understood the last one. So they're required to do an assessment every 3 years. So let's say they did it in 2020, in this case, in 2021, they would have to go back and give that report. Or if they were asked in 23, they would go back to 20. Because that was the
Essentially, they
last
would say that we
assessment.
didn't have a report, we didn't have an assessment last year. Right, it would just be for an assessment in the prior year.
The only reason I asked that, and I'm not going to ask too much, but 3 years, a lot of things change. I don't know. I mean, an assessment is vital because technology is changing so fast. And I just want to make sure I understood it. And I'm sure that Delegate Young probably already took a look at that.
And we felt that 3 years was a good balance, sticking with our normal timeline of assessments and audits. And to your point, leaving it open and requiring or requesting reports, depending on if there's a weakness found during that assessment, and then they want follow-up. So it leaves it open for continued monitoring, but not requiring them to spend and sometimes considerable amounts of money for an assessment every year.
Sure.
Yeah, so that was the thought, Delegate.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hopefully this is the right time to ask this question. Let's assume the first two bills have passed, or maybe we have to assume one of the other bills has passed. But the hack at the Department of Health occurs. What happens under this series of bills? What role, if any, does Do It play? Delegate Young, you want to try that?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, making sure
Go ahead.
muting in another voting session. Excuse me.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so the one, we're trying to be preemptive here, and the recommendations coming from centralizing and allowing for more authority over Do It to identify weaknesses, identify strengths, things that need to be fixed, where I can talk about it in terms of a proactive role. If an assessment would have been, for argument's sake, if an assessment would have been done on Department of Health prior to the hack, and Do It would have found weaknesses or securities or things that needed to be addressed or upgraded, they would have had, under this bill and under these bills, have authority to then correct, fix, shore up any shortcomings, and also in between the 3-year assessments, require reports that would then identify that they've fixed those problems. In terms of what happens after a hack, which we know that we're trying to prevent, but can't 100% be sure that we're going to prevent. If it's all right, if I could go to Mr. Duncan, if you're still, Richard, if you're still here, if you want to speak to that in terms of the joint, if you wouldn't mind talking about that in terms of the joint committee.
I can, yes. So one of the biggest sort of shortcomings that we've identified through our various meetings and activities of the joint committee is cybersecurity and IT is very disjointed across the state right now. So local governments are kind of doing their own thing over here. Do It, who is in direct control of about 30 state agencies, is kind of doing stuff over here. You have some of the bigger agencies like MDOT that handles their own stuff, and to some extent the Department of Health down here, and everyone's kind of, working on their own. So the major goal, I think, of the bill is kind of like create the lines of communication and the cooperation that will be necessary to kind of effectively respond to cyber attacks and hacks. So to answer your question more specifically, in the Department of Emergency Management, in one of the bills, I cannot remember exactly which one, there creates sort of like a centralized reporting office. Since emergency management is the ones who are good at responding to things and getting the logistical lines set up and the communication going. So that'll kind of be like the first stop to report. But then also reports need to go to Do It, and then Mdem has to work with Do It in addition. So once the lines of communication are open and everyone's aware, the experts can step in and start kind of responding to those things. I think that answers your question, Mr. Chairman.
And we don't have that kind of oversight and review under existing law? Question mark.
Yeah, question mark is a good way to phrase it. It's kind of, a lot of things have been changing over the last few years with IT and cyber management, and I don't think the law has necessarily kept up. So it's debatable what, under current law, what exact authorities Do It has. and what goes on. Oh, I see Mr. Mulford's on here too. He may be able to speak a little bit.
Okay, Mr. Mulford.
Mr.
briefly.
Chairman, I'm the legislative liaison from DoIT. It is not in law that setup, but that is exactly what happened with the MDH incident. It came to Mdem, who then let us know basically simultaneously. We all found out together, and then our cybersecurity experts kind of took over from there. So it is not in law, but that is how it actually worked out this time around.
Okay. Thank you. We're back to council. Lindsay? We're in the home stretch.
All right,
Let's go.
on page 34, we have requirements for local governments that are not municipal governments for their creation of cybersecurity preparedness plans, assessment, and reporting. This is also in House Bill 1202. And I will note another technical amendment that needs to be added here after line 21 or so is language that does appear in the reprint that was circulated for 1202, but is not here, is language on assessments from vendors. Delegate Young will know what I'm talking about there. That was added into 1202, but just to make sure that it matches here. There's also language further down on reporting cybersecurity incidents for local governments. This language tracks with language that appears in 1202 in the Mdem statute. So I just want to clarify that we're here in the sort of do-it world of statute, and Mdem is under public safety. So this language for reporting local cybersecurity incidents through Mdem and do-it tracks in both of these locations. So it's duplicative, but if you're looking in Mdem statute, you'll see it. If you're looking in do-it's statute, you'll see it. So I just want to clarify the duplicative nature of this language in two different parts of code. Okay, on to page 35. This language that's struck here was relating to procurement, which is now covered in House Bill 1205, so it's taken out of this bill. There is language requiring DoIT to implement a governance, risk, and compliance module by December 31st, 2022. This is already in the works, I'm told, and this language is here to make sure that DoIT does this expeditiously. And then there is language struck, additional special sections that would have transferred money, records, and associated personnel related to IT cybersecurity from each of the units to DoIT. This was, again, because everything was for the procurements was going to be centralized under DoIT, and because that is not happening in this bill, then that language is struck, because we do not need to transfer their money and personnel out of those other units.
Are there any questions?
Or amendments on this bill?
On this bill? Okay.
And everyone that the chair has an amendment as well, but after the sponsor amendments.
Okay, well, there are going to be sponsor amendments in the bill. And then unless we want to incorporate it in those, we can, the references, council, that you made to technical changes that need to be made.
Yeah.
I assume there's no problem with those. So I would request a motion on the amendments that are in the interlineated bill, plus incorporating by reference those two, I believe it was, two sets of technical changes that Lindsay referenced during her summary of the bill walkthrough. Is there a motion to adopt?
I move
those
the amendments that are embedded in the bill and the two amendments that we discussed.
Thank you. Here's a second. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, it is unanimous. The chairman's amendment.
So as I mentioned, the chair has an amendment to specify qualifications for the state chief information security officer. Those were sent by a separate amendment document to this committee. This language would be added both in 1346 and 1202, since this office is created in both of those bills. And just to clarify, the duplicative nature of that is because in drafting, we always have to assume that, for whatever reason, a bill might not pass. So you don't want language that doesn't make sense. So if you're going to be giving responsibilities to an office or responsibilities to, in this case, the state chief information security officer under the bill, and they need to exist. And that's why you see this duplicative language. So these are, I don't know if Pendergrass is still on the line, but I know that she's consulted with some experts in the field as far as what sorts of requirements might be, so what qualifications might be beneficial for this position.
And I was going to also say, talking to the experts from the interim committee, they also agreed with identifying specific minimum requirements associated with this.
Okay, is there any discussion? Does someone wish to offer the chairman's amendment?
So moved.
Think you'd be scrambling to do that. Okay, moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye, none opposed. Is there the amendment is adopted? Is there a motion on the bills? There is. The bill as amended. It is seconded. All those in favor of the bill as amended, please raise your hand. All those committee members in favor of the bill as amended, please raise your hand. Is there anybody on the second row or the second page? Come on now. Is anyone opposed? Okay, it is unanimous. I believe the hour of 3:34 having arrived, we should call a halt to this subcommittee, subject to the call of the chair, or and also given that Delegate Young is not with us anymore.
He's still here.
I'm back.
Oh, okay.
It was quick.
Should Lindsay, any thoughts, suggestions?
At the risk of incurring the wrath of my fellow committee counsel and the other members, I think hopefully we can do 12:02 pretty quickly, and then Delegate Young doesn't have to join us again for another subcommittee meeting.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll take responsibility for it. You can tell Aaron it was my idea.
1202 broadly creates an information sharing and analysis center and cyber preparedness unit in Mdem. These are both resources for local governments. Codifies the Office of Security Management, the head of which is the CISO, which we've already discussed, and requires locals to do cybersecurity preparedness plans, complete annual assessments, and report. Again, we've already discussed that. So diving into this bill, we again have renumbering and cross-reference corrections for the first few pages. On page 7, the cybersecurity support, local cybersecurity support fund, which I mentioned was moved to House Bill 1205. The Fusion Center that was originally in the bill is renamed as the Information Sharing and Analysis Center. On page 8, the Cyber Preparedness Unit is created as the primary emergency response entity for cybersecurity incidents. They are in Mdem. The unit is a cybersecurity resource for local government. On the top of page 9, local governments are reporting cybersecurity incidents to their local emergency managers, Security Operations Center, and the Joint Operations Center. Again, this language tracks with the language that we discussed in the other bill, but this is under Mdem statute rather than under DUITS. So the language is the same, it's just appearing in 2 different places in code so that people looking for it will find it where they expect perhaps to find it. The bottom of page 9 is the creation of the Information Sharing and Analysis Center in Mdem. The role of the center is to coordinate information on cybersecurity, coordinate between local units, support the CISO and the unit, and conduct analysis of cybersecurity incidents. On pages 10 and 11 is the local fund being struck from this bill. It was moved. Moving on to page 12, we're under DUIT now. This is again codifying the Office of Security Management and the CISO. Language has already been discussed under the prior bill. And yet again here, the chair's amendment on the qualifications for the CISO would be interlineated into this bill on page 12. So continuing along, we're continuing to match language. We have some more corrected cross-references. On page 18, this is a provision that, if you recall, I drew your attention to in the other bill. I said it was being struck completely from that bill and it was going to appear in this bill. This would require, originally it would have required each unit in the legislative or judicial branch and each unit of local government that use the network established by DO-IT to certify that they're in compliance with the department's minimum security standards. The amendment strikes this requirement for the legislative and judicial branches because there were some concerns about separation of powers issues there. And then further down, we have the requirement to do, locals do cybersecurity preparedness plans, complete the annual assessment and report, what we've already discussed. This language at the bottom of page 18 is what I mentioned, that one of those technical changes for 1346. So the assessment may be from DO-IT or from an authorized vendor. So that language is one of those technical changes that will be inserted into 1346. On page 19, the top of the page is the fund that was struck from the bill. That language is struck. Further down, language is also struck relating to procurement, which is now covered under House Bill 1205. On the top of page 20, Office of Legislative Audit reports should redact cybersecurity findings consistent with auditing best practices. Then we have special section language having the CISO and Secretary of Emergency Management review the budget and make recommendations. And also the CISO should commission a feasibility study on expanding operations of the Security Operations Center, and a requirement that the governor include an appropriation in the 2024 budget to cover the cost of that feasibility study.
Are there questions? Seeing no questions, is there a motion to adopt the amendments that were interlineated in the bill?
May I raise a quick point?
Sure.
Delegate Young, I'm not sure if you had an opportunity to look at it, but I received an email from a representative from Mdem a little bit earlier. They weren't able to attend this meeting, but they raised a question about the establishment of the ISAC in Mdem and suggested moving it to DO-IT.
Thanks, Lindsay. I hadn't seen that or from them, so that's new information for me. Sorry.
Lindsay, why?
Thanks.
So they said, as the technical subject matter experts, DO-IT is better positioned to analyze and disseminate threat information related to cyber and network disruptions. Mdem stands ready to assist in coordinating information from the ISAC as well as Maryland's existing fusion center. So as I mentioned, the ISAC is the fusion center renamed. So I think there might be some confusion here on whether or not, it's the fusion center that's really already in existence from Mdem, renaming as the ISAC under the bill.
Got it.
The role of ISAC also was to help coordinate. So I don't know that there's a need to move that to DO-IT, but I'll defer.
I'm happy to have a conversation with them, but I think it's a misunderstanding, and I'm not sure which one they're looking at, but that was the understanding, that we renamed it and kept it with them since they're already doing it. That was where they already have the framework there. So, but I'm happy to have a conversation with them. I don't see it as a huge issue. I think it's addressed because their concern, I think, is answered in the way that we have it structured here. But I can reach out to them after this hearing.
The other point that they raised on page 8, the amendment language that adds the cyber preparedness unit is the primary emergency response entity for the state for cybersecurity incidents. They suggested striking that language.
Okay.
Is this a good time to break?
Delegate Young?
I think we just, go ahead, sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Taking in what you said, I think we had left it, or we had put it this way because of the fact that in the event of an emergency or a cyber attack, Mdem already has a role to play. So we were fashioning it in such a way that it just went into their normal role as the emergency managers. I can have a conversation with them, but I didn't think it was, and at this point, I don't think the language changes what they currently do. It just sort of clarifies in the event of a cyber emergency that there's a relationship now that that includes do it as well. I see what they're saying, but I don't think that that's it's preventing them from doing what needs to be done or what we're trying to accomplish here with a response, if that makes sense. And that's coming from me. I mean, this is new language, so I'm sorry I haven't had a chance to tease it out, but I'm pretty sure I think we're staying within the guidelines that they're already using. So if we could, I mean, I'm comfortable with talking with them. I just don't think that this is I don't think it changes anything currently being done where we can't move it. And then if there's a concern related to it, I'm pretty sure is already addressed. I don't think it's worth holding up what we're doing now.
Understood. Thank you. Okay.
Delegate Young, do you think that you could speak with Mdem before the voting session to clarify?
I'll reach out to him as soon as I'll reach out to them right now.
But I'm here, excuse me for,
Hello.
but I'm here and I'm thinking that it'd be good to clarify these questions since they're very new to us. And we're not officially voting on the bill right now, although the subcommittee could vote on the bill with whatever clarification is necessary by our chairman's meeting. And then we can finish this little bit at the chairman's meeting today. And then the 3 bills could be voted on tonight by the committee, if you can get the answers to these questions from Mdem. Is that reasonable?
Understood. Yes, ma'am.
Chairman, like that as a solution so that we don't so that we know what we're doing. I'm funny about that. I sort of like us to all have a clue what we're doing.
Well, so we will then vote on the bill as amended with the understanding that we will get further information from Delegate Young. Okay, no objection. So the bill has been
Delegate Hill
amended.
has her hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to move the bill, or move the amendments and then move the bill. So
Okay, so the amendments, including the chairman's amendment, have been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
aye.
The ayes have it. Is there a motion on the bill as amended?
Move the bill as
The
amended.
bill is amended.
Second.
So moved. All those in favor say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? It is unanimous. So pending further word from Delegate Young, we'll figure out how to get that communicated. We are adjourned. You either have a free time or you have another subcommittee,
Or 2.
myself included. Thank you. Thank you all very, very much.
Thank you, everybody.